Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning in the States, and thank you for joining us for this paper launch event and panel discussion on how Central European and particularly V4 countries can re-energize EU enlargement. My name is Dániel Hegedűs. I work as a senior fellow leading GMF Central Europe programming, and I am warmly welcoming our today's panelists, Jana Juzová, ReThink.CEE fellow at GMF and senior research fellow at the European Institute, who is the author of the today presented paper. Engjellushe Morina, senior policy fellow in the wider Europe program of the European Council on Foreign Relations. And last but definitely not least, Andrzej Sadecki, Central European Department at the Center for Eastern European Studies, most widely known as OSW in Warsaw. It's fair to say that since their accession to the European Union in 2004, the Visegrad countries successfully built a reputation and also a policy profile of being the champion of supporting the accession process of the Western Balkan and the Eastern Partnership countries. Jana's paper, which is recently published by GMF, takes a close look on that diplomatic EU policy and assistance toolkit of the V4 countries, as well as their individual approaches to the enlargement, which serve that goal. And the central question for our today's discussion is, how can the efficiency of this engagement of the V4 countries be improved? And how can the V4, aside of being engaged, also develop to be more successful advocates of the enlargement process? And potentially a more sensitive question with an eye on the upcoming days and the European Council meeting on this Thursday and Friday, I think the question is also legitimate, whether in light of Hungary's recent blockade to Ukraine's EU ambitions, and also the country's attempt to hijack the enlargement policy for its extortion game with the EU, whether it still does make sense to talk about Visegrad as a format that jointly champions EU enlargement, or we have to develop a more diversified approach to the question how Central European countries can support and foster the EU accession to the Eastern Partnership and the Western Balkan. But before we would start discussing these interviewing questions, a couple of words about the housekeeping rules. Jana will present her paper's main findings in approximately 15 to 20 minutes, followed by the comments and contributions of Engjellushe and Andrzej in more or less 10-15 minutes each. And approximately after 45 minutes, we will go into the Q&A. And ladies and gentlemen, I really would like to encourage you to use either the Q&A function or the chat function of Zoom to submit your questions and comments to our panelists. I also would like to remind you that the event is recorded and will be available online at the YouTube channel of the German Marshall Fund. And last but not least, I would like to mention that Jana's paper is part of one of our flagship projects here in GMF, which is called ReThink.CEE Fellowship. Supports innovative research projects conducted by a new generation of policy analysts and civic activists from Central and Eastern Europe and the Western Balkan. And I also would like to emphasize that the application to this fellowship is recently open. The deadline is the 15th of January. So if you belong to our target group or policy expert from the region under 35, do not hesitate to reach out to us if you have questions with regards to the fellowship, or just feel free to apply until January 15th. And having said that, I would like to give the floor to Jana. Over to you.
Thank you, Dániel, for the introduction, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone, also from my side, from Brussels currently. I will try to share the presentation which I prepared, so it's easier for you and for me also to follow. Yes, okay.
You can see it.
Okay, you can see it, perfect. So the title of my research and the final paper was "Do V4 and EU Enlargement Advocates with Limited Influence?" And I was focusing actually on the V4 support for both regions currently candidating for EU membership, so the Western Balkans and Eastern Partnership countries, or so-called associated trio, and also for their activities, advocacy activities at the European level, so towards mostly other EU member states and mobilizing this support for enlargement. I'm afraid actually my computer froze a bit. I hope you can still hear me, Daniel. Okay, I just cannot really shift the slide. But nevertheless, in this research, I was actually focusing on 3 levels of this support coming from the Visegrad countries. So on the bilateral level, so how each of these countries actually engages with Western Balkans and associated trio countries, and how it contributes to enlargement agenda at the EU level. I was looking also at the regional level, so how do V4 countries together actually have been shaping this agenda and supporting the candidates in their European aspirations. And then I was looking obviously at the European level. So what strategies, what tactics they are using in strengthening the attention paid or enhancing the attention paid at the European level to enlargement, and mobilizing the political will among the EU member states to actually continue stronger engagements with the regions, and also to continue the enlargement agenda as such. So when we actually, and I thank you, Daniel, for kind of highlighting this already now, because when I was preparing for this presentation, a challenge I was facing was actually what we are seeing this week, what the talk is about. And that's potential Hungary's veto towards Ukraine, both in terms of the financial support, but also when it comes to opening of the accession negotiations with Ukraine, and also awaited opening of accession talks with Moldova, potentially Bosnia and Herzegovina, and candidate status for Georgia, because this whole package, sort of, or all these recommendations coming from the enlargement package presented by European Commission last month, were very significant, or would have been very significant milestones in terms of advancing EU enlargement. So I can imagine that also the discussion today will be a bit different than if it would have been, let's say, 1 month ago when I was concluding this paper. So when we actually look at the bilateral level of relations and support provided by individually for countries towards the candidates, then we see that looking at the development assistance, for example, all the countries of Western Balkans and of Eastern Partnership, or specifically associated trio, actually have a very high standing in the strategies and programs of each V4 country. So they are among the main beneficiaries of development assistance from Visegrad countries. For example, the Czech Republic, one of the specifics is also its transition promotion program run under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, where again Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Kosovo are among the, I think, 10 target countries. So again, we can see that the focus on the Western Balkans is also strong. Plus there is Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, together with Armenia and Azerbaijan, I believe. So again, we see that the attention and the traditional relations are very strong. Also, quite when we actually look at the regional level and technical support through regional cooperation, this is also something that has been quite an integral part of Visegrad cooperation since their own joining of the European Union in 2004, because when the Visegrad Group was kind of reassessing its standing and its contribution to the EU policies at that time, neighborhood policy and enlargement process, and this providing of the support in terms of solidarity to other countries with similar aspirations was one of the crucial features. So very soon after, we actually saw that not only the V4 countries started advocating for continuation of this process and for helping other countries aspiring for membership to actually achieve this goal, we also saw that they at the regional level started focusing much more on transfer of know-how towards these countries from their own experience with Euro-Atlantic integration and democratic and economic transformations. So since 2010s, we actually could see that Visegrad Group was the only regional grouping within the European Union which organized on a regular basis ministerial meetings of the V4 ministers, foreign ministers, together with their counterparts from the Western Balkans and from the Eastern Partnership countries. This unfortunately has been kind of stopped, this practice, because of in the past 2 years, I believe, because of Hungary's stance, most importantly on the Russia's aggression towards Ukraine, and the divergence that we could actually observe between the or among the V4 countries on this important issue. So the question is now whether these meetings will be renewed again and whether they should be renewed given the current situation and political environment.
Sorry, Jana, to
yeah.
interrupt. The slides are not moving.
Yes, I
yes,
know.
okay.
I tried to signal to you, but for some reason my computer froze. So I'm actually happy that you can hear me. It's a struggle also for me.
Then excuse me for the interruption and sorry for the technical.
Yeah, no problem. I hope I will manage to fix it. Maybe just give me a second. Okay. I don't seem to be able to do something with it right now, but I will try to finish the presentation, and after where other more important speakers will be sharing their opinions, then I will try to fix this issue. But yeah, so I was talking about the regional dimension, or very important aspect of the regional support from the V4 countries towards Eastern Partnership and Western Balkans is the International Visegrad Fund, which was established in 2000 because it was supposed to actually promote people-to-people contacts, cooperation among civil society within the V4 region. But in 2010, 2008 or so, it developed the new program, the new granting scheme, Visegrad Plus, where cooperation among civil society organizations, NGOs from the V4 countries and Western Balkan or Eastern Partnership regions is actually promoted. In order to share both the know-how, prepare these countries for democratic transformation, for European integration, but also in general to strengthen actually connections between these organized types of organizations and people-to-people contact more generally. So this is actually quite a paradoxical situation, I would say, because now when we actually observe serious democratic backsliding in Hungary, in Poland, we will see what will happen now with the new government and exciting elections. And now we have not very optimistic situation, let's say, in Slovakia. So we have these serious issues with democracy and rule of law within some of the V4 countries, but in the same time, still through the International Visegrad Fund, they jointly actually support European integration and the necessary democratic transformation and democratic actors within the countries of their neighborhoods. Apart from this, then of course we have the some specifics also of the approach of individual V4 countries. In the paper, there's a specific subchapter on this. I don't want to get too much into each of the countries' stance, but maybe just to point out some specifics, some interesting examples. So apart from the Czech Ministry's transition promotion program, which again is specifically designed for supporting democratic institutions, civil society, free media, and so on in the target countries. There is an interesting practice by Hungarian government where it actually seconds or delegates national advisors to the state administrations of the candidate countries or potential candidate countries. For example, in the Western Balkan, it's this situation we see in all 6 Western Balkan countries, where there is a seconded national advisor on EU matters. So again, when we talk about technical assistance, about sharing of the know-how with the accession process, with the reform process, this is something very significant, I would say, and very unique for Hungary. Also, in terms of Hungary's relation towards the neighboring candidates, a very important thing that should be kept in mind every time we are trying to assess this is actually the role of Hungarian minorities in neighboring countries in Hungary's foreign policy, because it's very crucial and very instrumental, I would say. We are seeing it also now when we watch the relation between Hungary and Ukraine, how the potential violations or discrimination of rights of Hungarian minority in Ukraine is actually being used by Hungarian government as a reason why to block Ukraine at various occasions. It was also very important in relations between Hungary and Serbia. Also, I feel like now in past years, the relations have been better than ever, I would say. And it also depends on the political alignment of the current governments and so on. When we look at the European level, then we can see actually quite a mixed record of how Visegrad countries, either individually or as a group, are actually effective at influencing the agenda of the EU and kind of pushing forward the enlargement. Or they can actually use both formal and informal means of influencing the EU's agenda. Formal ones are most importantly the presidency of the Council of the European Union, or voting in the Council of the EU as also, or then the European Council, as we are actually seeing now with the upcoming meeting at the end of this week. When we talk about informal means of influence, the most significant ones are, first of all, the ability to obtain high-level positions within the European institutions related to either the regions of Western Balkans or Eastern Partnership or the enlargement agenda as such. So here in my research, I was looking specifically at the European Commission at DG NEAR. I was looking at the European Union External Action Service, and I think I was also looking at the missions actually in specific countries which are aspiring for membership or are relevant for the V4 countries. And other means of informal influence are the ability to provide inputs into important strategic discussions and decisions at the EU level. So, for example, before the European Council deciding on progress in terms of enlargement of some of the countries, the EU member states quite, I don't want to say often, but they actually have the possibility, and they use it, of providing non-papers, statements, joint letters, and so on, to express their position, to actually come up with some new ideas which should be discussed and should somehow shape the decision which will be taken afterwards by all the EU member states. And the last, but not least, definitely, and very relevant for the V4, is the ability to shape flexible alliances on the agenda of common interest. So in case of the V4 countries, this is actually quite an interesting topic to look at, because the V4 grouping as such is quite naturally the most developed, or has been throughout the years, the most developed platform for coordination of the country's approach to enlargement, but also other EU policies. But because of the partially because of the growing disagreements within the V4 and I would say even toxicity actually of the Hungarian government towards other V4 partners, we could see that it kind of pushed other V4 members to actually search for wider alliances, to actually cooperate with other partners within either the region of Central Europe or also beyond the region, scope of the region. So another platform which is important, or where the EU enlargement agenda is an important topic, is the Slavkov Triangle, so a grouping of Austria, Czech Republic, and Slovakia. It was a topic in so-called Centro 5, which was quite a spontaneous platform which emerged during the COVID crisis, but again, because of involvement of Austria and Slovenia, again, enlargement and support to Western Balkans was among the main topics. But we also see wider pan-European or cross-European alliances like the Tallinn Group, which brings together, I think, 14 countries which somehow support enlargement. So it's also called Friends of Enlargement Group. And the most recent example would be actually the Friends of Western Balkans, this initiative brought forward by Austria, throughout this year, where again we can see the countries of Central Eastern Europe neighboring with the Western Balkans actually kind of advocating together for a balanced approach in terms of progressing of enlargement process towards, when we have actually progressed towards Eastern Europe, then we actually should also not forget about the Western Balkans, which have been in the waiting room for 20 years, but also actually try to push the process forward in that region as well. So here, one of the crucial things is that, or the aspects or features is that unfortunately we still are seeing that the V4 countries, but also other countries supportive of enlargement, are not very successful at reaching out beyond the geographical limits. So either it's usually countries which are still new EU member states, so there is this strong sense of solidarity and they still vividly remember their own accession process, or it's the countries which are neighboring countries of either the regions of Western Balkans or potentially of Eastern Partnership countries, because they again have quite a specific relation to these regions and they have more interest in their European integration than let's say countries of Northern or Western Europe might have. So here one of my main recommendations was that the V4 countries actually should try, especially countries like the Czech Republic, Poland with new government, and so on, should actually try to kind of build wider alliances and mobilize the support, or at least initiate a very intense dialogue about this with countries which are generally enlargement skeptics. Because if we actually want to move the process forward, we have to get all the countries on board and build some common understanding, some common vision of where the European Union should be heading in the future. Because my laptop is still not working, it's still frozen, so I will try to summarize the recommendations, or which I called here in the presentation the way forward, in my own words. So apart from this building of wider alliances in the European Union, one of my main recommendations was that there is still actually potential for the V4 countries individually to provide more or do more in terms of technical assistance and sharing of the know-how with the reform process, with the technicalities of the EU accession process with the candidates. So as we see the example of Hungarian seconded advisors, this is something that other countries could be doing as well, offering their experts, delegating them into their state administration of the candidates to actually advise them on the process as such. This is something that also, when I was doing interviews with people or experts from the candidate countries themselves, some of them mentioned that this could be useful, but it has to be wholehearted in the sense that the experts would actually have to be, or advisors would have to be of proper qualifications and of high quality in a sense to really have a positive impact. So that would be something to consider. In terms of the regional cooperation, this can be very tricky, but the least to recommend is to actually sustain the support through the International Visegrad Fund to both of the regions. Ideally to increase the funding in the future, but I understand that the political reality might actually prevent this from happening. Another recommendation would be to actually consider the renewal of the V4 plus Western Balkans or Eastern Partnership meetings. And a huge benefit of these meetings in the past was that it wasn't just the two regions speaking to each other, but also on a regular basis representatives of EU institutions or of other EU member states, like-minded member states, or the presiding country at the moment were actually invited to these joint meetings. So again, this could potentially be a way how to communicate, or how to actually initiate more discussions around enlargement and its future. Then when it comes to the upcoming quite an important issue, and it's already being more and more discussed in the Brussels circles, is the upcoming presidency of Hungary in the Council of the European Union in the second half of next year, but also afterwards of Poland in first half of 2025. So again, these countries should, and that's a tradition, so I wouldn't expect anything else, put enlargement on top of their agenda, or also approximating these countries, the candidate countries, with the European Union. So that will probably happen. What would be good if we manage to achieve, possibly through this European Council conclusions or the ones in March, would be actually a commitment from the European Council to organize regularly the EU Western Balkans meetings. There already was the commitment in a declaration from the EU Western Balkans Summit in Slovenia in 2021, but it hasn't been always necessarily the case. And putting it on the agenda of the European Council or their conclusions could actually have much more impact. Also, the EU Eastern Partnership summits should be still organized and something to be continued despite the difficult reality when it comes to the Eastern Partnership as a region or a platform. And other issues are actually that the V4 countries should be advocating further and look for more partners in this advocacy for the gradual integration of the candidate countries. This has been a concept which was strongly pushed forward by the Czech presidency of the Council of the EU in 2022. There have been some steps made in this direction already, and the European Commission's enlargement package also kind of goes in that direction. So this is something, for example, when it comes to the institutional cooperation and the practice of inviting, let's say, ministers, sectoral ministers from the candidate countries to Council of the EU meetings, ministerial meetings on the agenda of or the issues of shared interest. This is something that should be continued on a regular basis, because right now it's something that the Czech presidency did. There have been several examples afterwards, but it's still not something that would be happening consistently as it should. So I will stop here and give the floor to back to Dániel and to other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jana. Thank you for this really excellent overview and all the great recommendations. I very much encourage you, ladies and gentlemen, to check out Jana's policy paper. You can find the link, the URL in the chat of Zoom. And I would like to turn to Engjellushe, because with your very extensive experience on the Western Balkans, I would like to ask you, how are Central European countries, and especially the V4, perceived as partners and supporters of the enlargement from a Western Balkan perspective? And what do you think, how could the V4 countries also enhance the impact of their support at the EU level, again, from an external candidate country perspective? To invite you to comment on Jana's points, because I think having this dialogue between the internal EU and external candidate countries perception would be really, really beneficial. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and huge congratulations to Jana for this very interesting paper. I have to admit there were many things that I wasn't aware of, how much the Visegrad countries have been engaged with the Western Balkans and Eastern Partnership. So I really enjoyed reading it, but especially enjoyed reading it against the background of what is about to happen this week. And so I was, I was catching myself thinking, I wish it would be as harmonious as it was a few years ago when Visegrad 4 was doing quite a bit with regards to the both regions. So on your question, Daniel, maybe I start with a couple of suggestions to also against the background of recently re-energized enlargement debate since the beginning of the war, since the beginning of Russia's aggression in Ukraine. And so there has been definitely a lot of talk, especially the political rhetoric has been at the level where we all, the enthusiasts of enlargement wanted the political rhetoric to be there. A lot of support for further expansion of the EU. But what ended up happening was that despite the consensus of all 27, there was hardly any deep thinking going on in EU member states, in particular EU member states especially. So there was this engagement of 12 experts from France and Germany But they were independent experts, and they produced a paper that looked mostly into institutional reform. Very important paper, but it's not very clear whether this is the official stance of Germany or of France. And then there was a report by a think tank in Sweden, another report by a Lithuanian think tank, all these inspired by government positions. There was a brief response from Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs to the Franco-German expert report. And then it stops here. There were no, for example, non-papers coming from different countries, but especially there was nothing coming from Central Eastern European countries on how they view further enlargement of both regions. And I think one of the things that would be really important to have is maybe a joint approach by Visegrad 4. I know maybe, at the point this could be a wishful thinking, considering that Hungary is not agreeing with many things that are being discussed ahead of the European Council meeting. But this could be something that would be very helpful to the Balkan countries, but also to Eastern Partnership, especially Ukraine and Moldova. There are a lot of complexities, of course, but with the new government in Poland, there is quite a lot of hope that the Weimar Triangle could be something that could help maybe align the thinking of Central and Eastern European countries together with, so to speak, old EU member states that most of them are traditionally not so pro-enlargement, which is my second point. Brings me to my second point. The Central and Eastern European countries are viewed as pro-enlargement countries by the Western Balkans. And there is a lot of, I would say there is a lot of positive attitude from all Balkan countries with regards to the support that they have received so far. And Jana outlines this really well in her paper. There are many things that you don't usually see in the daily papers or in the ordinary reports about this engagement, but it's all there. And I think it might have been even more of a constructive relationship a few years back rather than we see it right now. And especially with regards to the know-how, this is where Visegrad 4 could be a huge supporter of not only helping countries integrate closer into EU, but helping, which is what's proven to be really important, especially for the Western Balkans, to incentivize them. Because I think there is one real problem out there, that the fatigue might have been gone away in Europe with regards to enlargement, but the fatigue is definitely there with regards to enlargement in the Balkan countries. Looking into the public polls in the Balkan countries, the support for enlargement has definitely gone down in recent years, but especially after EU commissioner, or was it the president of the commission, said that there will be no enlargement under his watch in 2000, I think this was 2014. And then the fatigue kind of took root in the Western Balkans, and with it also the incentivization of pushing for further reforms. And now when you talk to the people from the region, the sense that you get is that all this enlargement talk is not going to lead anywhere. And I hope their attitudes are not going to be confirmed by the end of this week. But this is where I see Visegrad 4 being very, very supportive and very helpful, especially to the West Balkans, into finding a way how to incentivize them, because all Visegrad 4 countries have gone through this period themselves. The Big Bang enlargement of 2004, just like now, was driven by geopolitical incentives. It was a different story then, but it was, running along the same lines. It was post-communist countries needed to be brought in order to be economically and politically stabilized, because there was this danger that leaving, not very stable countries in your neighborhood might not bode well for European Union. So we have the similar case now, maybe a bit more complex, because the security issue has come far too close to Europe's border. And all this experience that Visegrad 4 and Central European countries have gone through themselves previously could share with the Western Balkans and definitely with Eastern Partnership. And with the Western Balkans, I think it would be very, very useful to incentivize them, to bring them back on board, to re-energize the enlargement debate.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Engjellushe. Andrzej, Poland, I think, belonged to those members of the Visegrad Four, which country has very clear geopolitical and regional preferences when it came to candidate countries and the neighborhood. My first question would be that, especially with an eye on the new Polish government, how could the strategic geopolitical necessity to proceed with enlargement among the association EU countries or in the former Eastern Partnership region be balanced practically with keeping the credibility of the enlargement process on the Western Balkan? And what role can a new Polish government play in that regard? And my second question is more general. I think even still until the beginning of this year, observers' perception about Poland could have been that obviously there is a very deep polarization domestically and potentially a clear dividing line between the elites when it comes to the deepening of the European integration, but there is an overwhelming elite consensus when it comes to the strategic priorities of Polish foreign policy and the external relations of the European Union. And then the election campaign came, and one could see very surprising developments at the field of Polish foreign policy, may it be the conflict related to the import of Ukrainian grain, or announcement of the descaling of support to Ukraine, but are not directly and necessarily related to the enlargement, although the access to the internal market obviously is. But here the question is, what level of continuity and what level of stability can partners expect from the new Polish government, and what will be Poland's strategic approach to enlargement in the years to come? Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thanks again for the invitation and for the presentation of Jana. Well, first thing I would like to say is that, well, I think it's an important paper and very timely, not only due to the fact that we have the European summit later this week with a lot of uncertainties actually about the enlargement, but also because, I mean, it seems that the process is again kind of re-energized, and when we think about it in terms of the regional cooperation, I think it can be a sort of new rationale or impulse for Central European cooperation. I mean, for all the countries, or almost all the countries, we'll see, this is an essential issue to stabilize both regions to the south and to the east. So this is, I think, clear for almost all the countries. I think the paper shows very well what we can build upon. It gives a very good kind of historical review also, what the V4 did in the past. It was very exciting to read for me. I knew about these things, but about many of these I already forgot. And I think actually the V4 was influential, maybe not always regarding the enlargement, but about bringing closer the neighboring countries in terms of the Eastern Partnership and other initiatives which were not always initiated by the V4, but always endorsed by the V4. One thing maybe I could add here that is not in the paper, I think, is that in 2022, just 4 days after the invasion, you had the letter of 8 Central European presidents who advocated for the candidacy status for Ukraine. So these were kind of the first countries to advocate that. Actually, Hungary joined, but a little bit later to this group. We know how it developed later, but I will go back to that in a second. So in general, I think the fact that countries of our region will, I'm speaking from Warsaw, will celebrate next year the 20th anniversary of their accession to the EU. It's also a sort of good symbolical moment to promote the enlargement. And well, the first, I think, important input of the region is, as Jana already mentioned, I think Engjellushe too, about the sort of advocacy, about the sort of impetus from the region, from Central Europe to promote the enlargement, also among these countries that are undecided. There is a group of Friends of the Western Balkans. I think the Friends of Enlargement is somehow the group of Friends of Enlargement that was established some time ago is not seen anymore. So I think this region could be the sort of engine for this group. And I think here, just a short side comment, I see this sometimes, you know, there is this juxtaposition between Eastern and Balkan enlargement, and understanding some frustration in the Balkans about the sort of fast progress by Ukraine and Moldova. I think it's important to remember that actually what happened in Ukraine re-energized the enlargement as such. And this is, at the end of the day, also a good development for the Balkans. So apart from this advocacy, I think there is a need, and now I will try to refer to some of your questions too. There is a need also to kind of have the internal debate within the region about the enlargement. First thing, and it was already also mentioned, what kind of enlargement we want. I mean, there is a certain legal framework, but also there are several concepts debated about the gradual integration and others. And this is something we have to discuss and decide also what are the advantages and disadvantages of these approaches. Secondly, it's the question how to prepare the EU. This debate is also ongoing, but it seems that, as was mentioned also before, there was a Franco-German paper, which didn't seemingly provoke a lot of enthusiasm, not only in the region, but I think in general in the EU. But the debate is there, and it would be good again to have a sort of coherent response also from the region to that, but not only to the institutional reform of the EU, but also to the, you know, the reforms of the key policies of the EU, which will be essential if Ukraine especially, but also other countries would join the cohesion policy, the agricultural policy, etc., etc. So finally, we have to also, and this is also linked to that, we have to prepare ourselves. I mean, we have to prepare our countries. As you mentioned, Dániel, there were several disputes recently with Ukraine regarding grain grain import, about the trucks, etc., etc. So this is also necessary to kind of understand what are the interests of the region and how they can be reconciled with the enlargement. I think, well, this will anyway come up with the negotiations of particular chapters, but obviously first we have to start the negotiations, and this should start as soon as possible, of course, and we'll see. I mean, we have the European Council this week with many question marks. And maybe a final comment would be about the challenges of the process. I think you might have realized that I was a little bit avoiding speaking about the Visegrad Group itself, but about the Central European cooperation. Because, I mean, we see this divide now in the V4. I mean, we see it especially since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We've seen it before on different issue, but since the invasion, we see Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia very much in favor of supporting Ukraine, Hungary having another standpoint. So I think it's necessary to think about Central European cooperation, not necessarily always as a before. I mean, I think Jana also refers to that in the paper, that we can also have other countries from the region on board. We can have the Baltic countries, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. We can have Romania. We can think about the Nordics that are also in general in favor of the enlargement, and we can think also about the sort of more. I mean, we can think of it either in terms of other existing regional formats, 3Cs initiative, other, but we can think also about the sort of ad hoc regional coalitions of the willing, and it might be actually maybe the only way to kind of overcome the sort of divisions that we have in V4. Of course, these coalitions can include countries from outside the region. I mean, the region, when I think about the region, I see it more as an engine of these initiatives, but they can be, of course, EU-wide. And what would be important, I think, to keep from the Visegrad cooperation would be the International Visegrad Fund that was mentioned already, which played, I think, a very good role in supporting a lot of often small projects, but very important in kind of bringing the V4 countries and the Eastern neighborhood and the Balkans together. So I will stop here, and I'm looking forward for further discussion.
Thank you so much, Andrzej, for the great points. We already have a couple of questions, but I would like to encourage you, ladies and gentlemen, potentially to submit more, that we have some ammunition for further conversation. But let's start with one question exclusively to Jana, because she has been extensively covering that in the paper, whether there are certain clear geographic, regional, geopolitical preferences at the level of the individual Visegrad countries, whether you were able to identify such patterns during your research. And the second and potentially the third question, because you already touched upon these topics partially, are also, on the one hand, the question of the alternative formats. And here we could try to go beyond just mentioning them, and I would be really interested in your analysis, where there can be really hope for a critical mass of joint interest in regional cooperation exist in the future. Because I think what we were able to see over the past couple of years was that in spite of all of the criticism towards Visegrad and against individual member states, still the V4 somehow always gravitated back towards Visegrad. It's very visible in the case of Czechia, where itself the largest governing party is divided whether the country should be moved away from Visegrad or stick to it as to a proven platform. In the case of Slovakia, sitting in the middle of this format, I think it was never a question. And in spite of now the long history of Slavkov or Austerlitz, I think the real results or outputs of the A3 remain rather limited. So the question would be whether you could provide a sort of SWOT analysis of the existing formats and conclude what could be a real alternative, if any, of Visegrad in short to midterm. And the third question, again, to all of you, you mentioned a couple of times of the Franco-German position paper. And I really liked Engjellushe's point that, yes, it remained unaddressed and unreflected at the field of enlargement policy from the Visegrad countries or for Central Europe. But I think there is even a bigger elephant in the room, because at least that's my reading as a Central European from Berlin, that the main point of the Franco-German paper was that practically EU reform and enlargement are very organically intertwined and can't separate it from each other. And against that background, one can very often get the impression that, yes, the Central European countries are doing enlargement promotion, but they are not addressing the real concerns of the member states which are opposing enlargement. And obviously one reason is because that would be very difficult to forge constructive position on the EU reform. But I would be interested in your take whether there can be a constructive Central European approach in that field. What are the official positions of the respective national governments, if they are any, and whether you see any way out from this trap that, yes, Central European countries are preaching enlargement, but they are not addressing the obstacles to that enlargement. And I would like to give the floor to Jana.
Okay, thank you very much, Dániel. I hope you can hear me well. I'm sorry, terribly sorry for the technical difficulties, but now I rejoined the discussion. And first of all, I would like to thank Engjellushe and Andrzej for their excellent comments and contributions, I would say, to what I outlined, and very important remarks. And also to you, Dániel, for these excellent and difficult questions, I have to say. I will just, before answering your questions, go back a bit to a few things that the previous speakers talk about. First of all, I'm happy in a way that we actually got to this discussion of how enlargement and the EU internal reform are actually interlinked. Because that's definitely the direction the EU discussions are being swept at this point. And here, coming from Central Europe, what worries me as a think tanker from Czech Republic is that while we are so invested in the enlargement policy and it's advocating for or promoting, if we don't contribute to the discussion about the EU reform, then what we are seeing, the discussions are developing without us. And what I see as a risk, especially connected to the Franco-German paper, which talks about these different circles of integration, it sounds a lot like the concept of multi-speed Europe, which Macron was presenting a few years ago, and it didn't resonate very well in Central Europe. I have to say, I'm really afraid that at some point, the discussion about deepening in different circles, in different speeds, will move forward without us, and we actually will have to only react to what is being pushed forward by other more active actors. So here I definitely would like to see more contributions coming from Central Europe on where we actually want to, and more vision in a way to what European Union should look like in the future. What is our vision of the European Union, how it will be functioning, how it will maintain some level of unity and so on. And so far my impression is that our governments are mostly just closing their eyes in front of this discussion and just saying that we don't want any reform. We are absolutely against QMV in common foreign security policy and so on. So that's one thing. And also when Andrzej was talking about these good examples coming from Visegrad, and I will say I'm actually a big fan of Visegrad cooperation as such, but quite naturally, and it was the case in the past, there are periods when the governments, the political constellation within Visegrad, either is very divergent, so there have been periods in the past, and we are seeing it also now, when the cooperation, of course, is still existent, but it's kind of pushed towards lower levels, towards, let's say, cultural cooperation, cooperation in research and development, and these like softer issues away from the high politics. But then there are sometimes periods in history when there is more alignment and more proactive action can be done. What was very unfortunate was that the biggest visibility the Visegrad Group got was during the migration crisis, because of the joint very negative attitudes towards the quota and towards basically any discussions at the European level of some common approach to solving the crisis. And that was very sad, because I feel like, for us coming from the region, we knew about Visegrad, we liked some things about Visegrad, we knew how it functions, that one of the fundamental principles of the cooperation is the ability to disagree, to have the consultations, but that it's okay that sometimes we just have different positions. And in that case, there is no need to force ourselves into joint position, like, okay, let's each of us, stand for something else, and that's completely fine, but let's keep these consultations going. And for most of Western Europe, Visegrad became visible only because of this negative label. But I also wanted to mention, specifically related to the International Visegrad Fund, that one of the main contributions, and also it reflects how positively the Visegrad cooperation is still actually seen, especially in the region of the Western Balkans, is the establishment of a Western Balkans Fund, which is kind of a copy-paste of an International Visegrad Fund in the Western Balkan region. So it was established with the support of IVF, with the support of national governments of the V4, and with financial contribution from the IVF, and also the Think Balkans project or network, which is being established with limited success, unfortunately, because of the political reality in the Balkans, by our colleagues from think tanks from Western Balkan countries, again, according to a successful project working in the Visegrad countries called Think Visegrad. So again, there are some examples still to be drawn and to build upon. When you asked about the geographical preferences, yes, I didn't want to get too much into it in the short presentation, but there are definitely big differences among the V4 countries. It's quite natural, I would say, that, for example, for Poland, for a very long period, the relations and the focus on Eastern Partnership or Eastern Europe in general was much, much stronger than towards the Western Balkans. I think this is changing, and Andrzej can definitely tell more about it, but my impression is that in the past few years, Poland actually started to be more engaged in the Western Balkans. It was before through big contributions to civilian and military missions, but now it was also, the host of the Berlin Process Summit, and also in general, it's becoming more active there, but there is still the natural, geographical and cultural and historical leaning more towards Eastern Partnership countries. On the other hand, Hungary, in my research, what I found out, this Eastern dimension is rather underdeveloped, let's say. My explanation, or one of the explanations from expert community I found, was also that it's because of the limited administrative capacities in quite a small national administration in Hungary. So kind of they have to choose their priorities. So Western Balkans, again, because of history, because of geographical proximity, because of security concerns, is very dominant. I think for Slovakia and Czech Republic, it's more balanced. We have strong connections traditionally with both of these regions. When we talked about the alternative formats, that was your second question. What I say, and I liked your remark about the V4 kind of always coming back together in a way, and my explanation would be that it's the most organic of the formats, because it was created. That's also the difference between Visegrad and between regional cooperation initiatives in the Western Balkans, for example, because for Visegrad countries, it was, just this like very natural consequence of end of the Cold War, of fall of the Soviet Union, of, this geopolitical vacuum in Central and Eastern Europe at that time. and this joint pursuit of Euro-Atlantic integration, and also the need, to address these issues, all these historical issues that basically were the same for all the countries. So there is still, I think, a lot of this natural alliance coming just simply from the fact that we cannot move away from Visegrad. They're the closest neighbors. For example, coming from Czech Republic, compared to our other neighbors, which is Germany and Austria, naturally we share the same challenges with the Visegrad countries, overcoming of the legacies of the past, dealing with, green transition, which is phasing out of coal, which is very difficult for us. Like, all these issues are very, very similar. So I think also the worldview is naturally more similar at times. Yes, the other regional formats, again, unfortunately, I did some research many years ago on the Slavkov cooperation, and the problem we identified back then, I think it still remains relevant, is that Austria is not very interested or engaged in pursuing this. It actually still serves more of a Czech or Czechoslovak attempts to kind of divert away from Visegrad, from Hungary and Poland, and Austria, of course, is a desired partner, but we don't have that much in common, naturally, as with Poland and Hungary, despite the political atmosphere. When it comes to the 3Cs initiative, here I don't see much potential when it comes to pursuing, enlargement agenda or some bigger political cooperation. But still, I think it can be instrumental when it comes to approximating or integrating the candidate countries with the European Union, because if I'm not mistaken, the 3Cs initiative even actually expanded its membership to this like associate member status or something like that to Moldova and Ukraine, I believe, and I don't think it was done for the Western Balkans yet, but it would be kind of natural if we talk about infrastructure projects, because connecting these countries with the EU member states of Central and Eastern Europe is important. It's important for the economic development of the candidate countries. So again, here could be some kind of contribution, but I don't see potential for much shared political interests, let's put it that way. The Central Five, as I mentioned, it was as far as I know, it still somehow exists, but it's more this informal meeting at ministerial level. Enlargement is naturally a shared interest, but there is not much potential, much weight in it. And I think I covered most of the big regional cooperation formats. And the Franco-German paper, again, I was reading it as someone coming from Central and Eastern European country. I was reading it with a grain of worry, what it would actually mean for us, and whether Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, or Poland would potentially become some second-class members or second-tier members. And so again, it only emphasizes the importance of our countries actually taking the responsibility for not only pushing the agenda where we feel comfortable, which is enlargement, and that is traditionally close to us, but actually contributing also to this shaping of common European future as responsible partners, not just saying we don't want this, but formulate what we actually want. Yes, I think, and then the last remark, when it comes to the V4 and other pro-enlargement countries, not really addressing the concerns, the valid concerns at many times of enlargement skeptic countries. Absolutely, this is very much true. I think the Czech presidency actually did a good job in this regard, because they really tried to, from what I know, to have a more open discussion about this. What are the concerns of these countries that are not in favor of enlargement? How could it be overcome? What's the common denominator, let's say, or some common grounds among all EU member states? But this is very difficult, and that's why we need more honest and open discussion about the reasons behind it. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jana, for this really, really, really informative reply. And if I can just abuse the moment for some self-promotion, then we also have an upcoming paper here in GMF, which is arguing in the direction that, yes, if Central European countries would like to remain influential in a positive way at the field of the enlargement policy, they also have to address the question of the EU reform in a constructive way. And I hope that if we start this discussion, and it was partially already started by the Franco-German paper, as we noted, sooner or later, it will be also noticed at the level of the decision makers that having this conversation is absolutely necessary. But I also stop here and over to you, Engjellushe.
I will just continue on your last point and Jana's point on the institutional reform and the lack of proactive kind of proactive involvement coming from Central and Eastern European countries. I think institutional reform is a very difficult topic for many member states because many member states are avoiding let's say the shift in the balance of power. Many member states do not like to see the types of veto power taken away because they see it as a protection of national national interests. And so on and so forth. So I think that's why we don't see a robust debate taking place on what type of institutional reform is needed. And we see very few inputs coming from many countries, apart from what we mentioned, what we have seen. But I think the good news is that in the Granada informal meeting, the leaders came up with the conclusions that they concluded that the reform debate and enlargement process have to go hand in hand. And I think I'd like to add here, even if there wasn't an enlargement debate right now, re-energized, EU needs institutional reform, really does, because right now it's not functioning very well. I think we're all witnessing this, that there are so many problems in there. But the debate has to start. And here, when I say the debate has to start, I totally agree it has to go parallel with enlargement. But the risk that EU will run here is that institutional reform debate might overtake the enlargement debate. And you already hear countries, candidate countries, aspiring countries complaining. And I think Ukraine was quite vocal about it. They don't want this debate to become a smokescreen for their ambitions. They want to continue with the reforms. They want to come closer to integration into the EU, and they don't want institutional debate to stop this from happening. So there is that danger there. Another point I want to mention is that the debate, and I think Jana, you elaborated really well on this, the debate on what kind of Europe member states envision has to also take place so that, many countries like Central European countries are not on the receiving end. So they also have to be part of what kind of Europe is being envisioned, participate in this type of vision creation, so on and so forth. Right now, what we see, at least from the outside, is a lot of disagreements, a lot of obstructions coming from, Hungary and maybe to an extent Slovakia. Austria is not playing very fair, I would say, in recent days and weeks. So there's definitely, there was this talk about the shift of balance moving from the center of Europe towards the east. But I think there is a tension there, and it's definitely not happening, the shift of the balance, because we still see this very odd couple, France and Germany, trying to push for things, and they don't even agree with one another. So there is definitely space for Central European countries to become more proactive, more involved, but I would add more constructive, because what we see right now doesn't, there is, of course, involvement, but it's not definitely, positively constructive. So I think I would leave it here, but I definitely agree that there is room. I mean, another very dividing line with regards to a consequential dividing line is, in fact, with regards to Euro-Atlantic integration of both regions, is the view on security issues between Central European states and member states, old member states such as France, for example. So for France, this whole debate about enlargement is also how to reshape European sovereignty, how we reshape the security architecture where Ukraine is part of it. And for Central European countries, it's really important that the US stays still very much involved. And then, this is even enforced. So there's already talk about what do we do post-Biden administration. and all that. But this is not necessarily shared by everyone. So there are all these issues that member states will have to, bring their heads together and discuss them. Maybe they are. We don't know what happens in the council meetings, but this is from as an outside observer, there's clearly a space that needs to be filled in with constructive discussions, but also proactivity by other member states, like the Baltic countries have been mentioned as well, and Southeast European countries as well have to be more proactive.
Thank you so much, Engjellushe. I wouldn't like to derail the discussion into the direction of EU reform. So just one phrase. I think it was exactly an ECFR research, but excuse me if I am referencing it wrongly, which showed that since 2015, more than 70% of the vetoes in the EU Council came from one country, which practically just underlines the fact that while having the veto right, for example, at the field of EU foreign policy appears to be really an essential ingredient of state sovereignty, in fact, it's a sacred cow, because even those member states who are really desperate to keeping it never used it over the past couple of years, if not potentially over the last decade. I think that's definitely the case, for example, with Czechia, and potentially just reflecting on that fact that vetoes are actually very rarely used even by those member states who would like to keep that right. I think it's an important starting point of that discussion. But having said that, Andrzej, you have the floor.
Yeah, just one short comment about the EU reform. I know that it's not a topic of our discussion exactly, but since you raised a couple of comments, I mean, I agree what has been said, that of course some kind of fine-tuning is important about the enlargement, institutional, but on the other hand, I mean, it's difficult when you see the regions, the country of the regions, to accept that, it's something that has to be done soon, and in the context when we have really kind of huge challenges around us. I mean, war with China, war with Russia, competition with China, migration challenges, etc. And I think there might be a sort of false logic that if we change the EU institutionally, we will kind of resolve the problems that we are facing. I mean, this is a bit of a larger problem, but that's another discussion, I guess. I would like to go back to the V4 and what Jana was saying, which I can subscribe, I think, to most of the things, and I completely agree that V4 was for a long time the most effective and lasting also format, and in a way natural for our countries. On the other hand, I mean, there are these challenges that we are facing now, also about the enlargement. I mean, enlargement was one of the bases of the V4 cooperation, one of the things that we agreed for 2 decades, basically about the Eastern neighbors and the Balkans. And now this agreement is to a large extent questioned. And I mean, of course, the Hungarian stance, and well, I suppose it's not yet fully clear what will happen during the summit on Thursday, Friday, but if there is a veto, I mean, that would undermine very strongly the V4 cooperation, because then you will have one of the sort of fundamentals broken, and we'll have to think how to find a way out of it. And I think this kind of thinking about more like regional terms, but not always institutionally, V4 might be a way out. I think it's a plan B. An optimal plan would be to have a strong, effective V4, but we'll see if it's realistic. So that would be my final point. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Andrzej. Ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to submit your questions to the last round. And meanwhile, I just would like to highlight that you can also find the link to the call for applications to the next iteration of our ReThink.CEE fellowship. And potentially, while we get further questions, I just would like to offer a last one for all of you, because we already touched upon the topic of phase-in or gradual or incremental integration. And I think exactly that's the field which is on the one hand highly discussed and debated, on the other hand where we have seen also very clear steps forward over the past, I would say, 2 years. There were also arguments even last year that now with the level of integration into the internal market, EU telecommunication market, and so on, practically Ukraine is better integrated in the European Union than Western Balkan candidate countries. And here my 2 questions to all of you would be: first, whether you see any low-hanging fruits at the field of phasing in or gradual integration, either to all candidate countries or a particular group of them. And second, whether it couldn't be a very constructive task for Central Europe. On the one hand, try to convince, especially the Western Balkan countries, that gradual integration is an opportunity also for them and not necessarily an evil attempt to derail the integration to the full membership, while also try to ensure within the European Union that gradual integration is not a evil attempt to derail the enlargement to full membership. I don't know who would like to start, potentially this time, Andrzej.
Okay, maybe I will start with something a little bit different. I would say that for all those countries, Central Europe is a sort of, in physical terms, a gate to the EU, right? I mean, infrastructurally, I mean, it will all go from Ukraine through Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, for the Balkans also through countries of our region. So one thing to focus also on is the development of the links between these countries, and it can be done also, I mean, it's being done already through the energy community and the transport community, which also covers both these regions. It can be done perhaps potentially through 3C's initiative, which has a strong infrastructural focus. So here we can, I mean, work on things which will actually link these countries physically to the EU. It's partly happening, but a lot of things are to be done. And well, with the gradual or phasing in integration, I mean, there are many concepts, but my impression so far was that there is not much appetite for that in the EU institutions, as there is a sort of methodology established, and this creates some uncertainty. It's a question how it can be done within the current treaty. Does it need any change regarding, you know, having well, even simple things like having representatives of those candidate countries joining partly some agency institutions, etc. I mean, it seems to be a good idea to kind of, given the fact that the enlargement is a long process, to have a certain way to engage them more in the meantime. But I see also quite a lot of question marks.
Thank you so much. Engjellushe.
Maybe I'll continue where Andrzej left it. I think there is no appetite so much in the EU about these different proposals: staged accession, differentiated integration, concentric circles. These proposals are flying around, but I also think there's no appetite in the candidate and aspiring countries. And I have to admit, I'm not a fan of anything rather than a full membership perspective. And then I like to give a couple of examples how can this work and how this worked in the past. So when EU was getting ready for the Big Bang enlargement of 2004, I think it was 1999 that they came up with the Berlin Agenda. So it was really this Berlin Agenda, it was a document outlining very clearly what EU has to do and what candidate countries will have to do to eventually meet in 2002. So they gave themselves a date, 2002. Countries were not ready, but they were ready in 2004. With regards to the region of Western Balkans, when visa liberalization was announced, that EU is prepared to lift visa liberalization for Western Balkan countries, they also came up with a date. Western Balkan countries, most of them apart from Kosovo, because Kosovo was not part of this, because of its status being kind of contradicted by some member states, most of the other countries, 5 other countries, were so kind of quick to reform in the sectors that needed reform. Usually this reform would take 5 years. They did it in 2 years. It was Albania that wasn't exactly ready, so they came in a year later. I want to say that when there is lessons learned from the past experiences, when there is a very clear timeline and when there is a set agenda and a date, this is an incentivization in itself. When you talk to Western Balkan countries, especially about anything else rather than a full membership, they say this is where you're not serious. And so I think if there were to, because incentivizing Western Balkan countries is proven quite difficult, I think. And so if there was to be an Agenda 2030 with a clear timeline and a clear roadmap, what the EU should be doing and what the candidate countries should be doing, considering a very serious conditionality and a very strict requirement, so everything based on merit-based process, I think it might work.
Thank you so much. If you allow me a follow-up question, wouldn't it be more credible if the EU would set this timeline for itself? Like, for example, it was suggested by the couple of times mentioned Franco-German paper that, yes, the EU should be ready to be able to absorb new candidate or new member countries for up to 2030. What would be the perception or the reading of such an approach among the candidate countries?
Well, the Berlin Agenda of 2000 was this. It was an outline of a roadmap of what EU should be doing to get ready and what countries should be doing to get ready. And that's exactly what I think it should happen now. There has to be a clear roadmap of what EU should be doing to get ready and what candidate countries should be doing to get ready. And even the Franco-German paper says that 2030 is not unrealistic for EU to be ready to bring in new members. We didn't touch upon absorption capacity, but absorption capacity is something not very well defined. And I think it mainly means the political willingness of EU 27 to bring in new members. So if there were to be a political readiness today or in the next 2 days, on how to on this how, because I think the how has not been discovered yet, then I think we could see a credible process in the years ahead. And I think I like to emphasize again, it has to be merit-based and it has to be based on strict conditionality so that the mistakes of the past are not repeated. Because there's also a little bit of kind of allergy. Oh, we don't want the same process as we had in 2004. Because we bring in countries who are really good on certain criteria and then they deteriorate. So I think with a strict conditionality, this very elaborate roadmap should also include these concerns.
Thank you so much. Jana?
Yes, I'm actually very happy about this question because gradual integration is a topic I've been dealing with extensively this year. And here I will just say the problem one of the main problems that I see inside the EU is the variety of the terms to describe this phenomena, and also that sometimes under the same term, some of the EU member states or different actors actually mean different things. And here is also kind of what it relates to the credibility of the process and whether it's supposed to be a substitute for full membership or not. So when I'm speaking about gradual integration, I actually see it more from the Czech perspective and what the Czech government also during the presidency was actually trying to do. And also what I see as the understanding of the European Commission, reading now the enlargement package and most importantly, the growth plan for the Western Balkans introduced last month. We are not talking about staged accession or differentiated accession, and I'm really strongly against introduction of any new member state stage or anything like that, because or associated member stage or something like that, because this, as Engjellushe was saying, this will absolutely create a big, basically disillusion, I would say, also, and a lot of dismay in the candidate countries, and understandably, because they are applying for EU membership, nothing less. But what I understand by gradual integration is more of this, what I would call enhanced cooperation in the pre-accession phase, which is supposed to actually, in a way, make it easier for these countries to integrate into the EU, and kind of ditch this black and white scenario where the candidate is not getting anything in the pre-accession phase. It's not included basically anywhere before signing of the accession treaty, and then it changes overnight with their accession into the EU. So when I talk, for example, about the institutional cooperation, so there are possibilities how to, of course, there's already the practice of inviting the ministers into the informal ministerial meetings of the council. But there is also discussion, less tangible, but there's discussion about granting the observer status in the European Parliament. There's definitely what could be done, and what I see as a low-hanging fruit is what the Commission seems to be willing to do, and that's actually to, first of all, create a level playing field between the candidate countries from the Western Balkans and those of associated trio when it comes to the possibilities of integration into the single market, because associated trio countries has these very advanced, deep DCFTAs, while the Western Balkan countries have less elaborate stabilization and association agreements. So even just reviewing them, seeing how we can, create new provisions could be helpful in this regard. But also when it comes to the comitology, so the bodies of the European Commission, European institutions dealing with different policies, different agendas. Here we already have some examples of participation of third countries. Usually it's the EFTA countries which participate in some of these bodies. But again, a review and assessment of how these bodies could be open to the candidates would be very helpful also for them to participate in a way in the policy making already, to have better insights into how the legislation and the new policies are being developed and adapt accordingly. What I see as quite, the first areas where we actually should enhance this cooperation. It's, in my opinion, it's actually the foreign policy. I understand this can be tricky when we talk, for example, about Serbia, but on the other hand, we have many countries which have 100% alignment with common foreign and security policy of the EU. So why shouldn't they actually participate in the decision making, or have at least listen to it, have a seat at the table when the discussions are being taken, maybe without the ability to vote and to actually decide. When we talk about green agenda, this I see as a very important area, because we already know that, for example, looking at the Western Balkan countries, because there I'm more familiar with the situation, these countries are significantly falling behind in alignment with the EU standards in this green transition. And with the EU ambitious green agenda, this will become more and more of an issue, because basically the bar is higher and higher, and the resources allocated for the candidate countries to be able to overcome these obstacles are not sufficient, and they are not comparable with those allocated for EU member states. So again, here if we don't want to create even bigger issue once we move forward towards with the enlargement agenda and maybe towards membership, then we should start addressing it already now. The same goes for energy. Migration is an obvious area of joint interest. There is already quite a high level of coordination. So again, it should be elaborated further. And it's always mentioned, and I always feel like still it's being forgotten or not paid enough attention to, and that's the mobility and people-to-people contacts, and especially youth mobility. So again, facilitating more exchanges, opening up the Erasmus Plus program, devoting more funds to exchanges of especially youth, but also researchers, civil society organizations, and so on, between the candidates and EU member states could be very helpful in this regard. And I just want to basically applaud Engjellushe on 2 points, which I think are very important for this discussion. One is when we talk about the date. This is something not completely new. Of course, most attention was devoted to it because of Charles Michel's statement at Bled this year when he floated the 2030 date as the target date. He got quite some backlash also for it. But in the same time, I never heard actually this comparison to the visa liberalization process. And again, I absolutely agree that if we manage to find some good examples working in the past, we should build upon them. So I think this is an important contribution to the discussion. And also when we talk about the credibility of the date, or what could be the reaction from the candidate countries if a date is set, again, I can only agree if there is not clear roadmap, if it's just floating a date but not saying how we are going to get there, then it's not credible, because we had these dates in the past. The most recent example I remember is from the 2018 strategy for the Western Balkans. There was mention of 2025 as the target date. We see it didn't happen, it won't be happening. So again, just saying a date without clarifying the road that leads there would not be credible. So I will stop here.
Thank you so much, Jana, for some very clear points. Unfortunately, we reached the end of our time, but nonetheless, I would like to give you the opportunity for a last closing remark, and would like to ask you to provide some takeaway from for our audience. What do you expect, and what should they watch or be aware with regard to the EUCO on Thursday, Friday? What would be your key message, key takeaway you would like to share with regards to the potential perspectives in the afterwards, especially in the case of a potential blockade to the whole enlargement process? What would like to share as a closing remark? Engjellushe.
Yes, very important question. I still like to continue hoping that we will see conclusions that we would like to see, some positive messaging, credible messaging for Ukraine especially, but also Moldova and other candidate countries, but also some kind of a line or two saying that there will be efforts will be made to start the institutional reform. I think this is what I'm still hoping to see. If that doesn't happen, then what we could do and we should do is continue the Europeanization debate, including both regions, and then talk about stuff that we already mentioned here. Other areas where we could continue working on, such as green transitioning, such as connectivity issues, energy issues. There is still quite a lot to talk about, security issues. And I would also like to add then, when we continue this Europeanization debate, to also bring in elements of the cost of non-enlargement. And what does that mean for the neighborhoods, but also for different countries like Central and Eastern European countries, Baltic states. And then last point, I think in the future, in our future debates, it would be really good to press the buttons. Where could Central and East European countries constructively contribute with proactive proposals, with proposals of their own, on the vision of how the European consolidated future will look like.
Thank you so much, Andrzej.
Okay, so I would like to have, I will have one optimistic and one pessimistic comment. I will maybe start with the latter. Well, we face a quite big risk that the process will be derailed, or at least for some time derailed during the summit, due to obviously to the veto we discussed already. And the risk is that if we postpone it for a couple of months, then we have the elections, then we have the Hungarian presidency, and the whole process will lose the momentum eventually. So that's the risk. On a more optimistic note, I think that the momentum is still there, and it's something which can be surprising for those that were observing the enlargement for the past decade. But I think that essential things are to have the timeline, what was already mentioned, and definitely, even if we will not reach it, it's a goal that we can kind of aim at. And the second issue is that I think in general, when we see the region, there is a high understanding of the cost of non-enlargement, and this kind of push will be there for the coming months. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Jana.
It's difficult to go as last in this challenging question. So I hope I won't be repeating too much of what has been said, but I can only underline the necessity to set the framework, because as Andrzej correctly mentioned, this actually will be the last European Council meeting, which, let's say in its full force, because in the new year, after the new year, and especially after March, everything will be revolving around the European elections, formation of new institutions, and there's a risk that this momentum, which I would be cautiously optimistic that we are probably seeing right now, might actually wither away again. And because we don't know what the European elections will eventually end up like, what the new parliament will look like, with the rise of nationalist and populist forces across Europe, this is very tricky. So I would very much like to see, in the best case scenario, some agenda 2030. I think it's too optimistic and too hopeful. So at least some kind of commitment, very explicit commitment, and more of a timeline on intermediary steps outlined at this council meeting, which would actually guide the process through the turbulent times of the next year. And I think that will be it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for this very lively and thought-provoking discussion. Thank you, Jana, for your very, very informative policy paper. And definitely thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today and remaining with us. I wish you all a lovely day and evening in Europe, and hopefully see you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.